Stanford University.
I want to welcome you tonight. Good evening. Come on, we can do better than that. Good evening. All right. My name is David Demarest. I'm Vice President for Public Affairs at the university, and I want to welcome you to this very, very special evening. Celebrating Founders is the second in a year-long series of symposia that invites our community to join us in celebrating Stanford's 125th anniversary. As we mark this moment in Stanford's history, there is so much to celebrate about this university and its impact in the world. We're so grateful that you are joining with us tonight to talk about one of the wonderful features of this university, and that is its entrepreneurial spirit. So tonight, I invite you to settle back, enjoy the program, and without further ado, would you please welcome John Hennessy, Stanford's 10th president.
Thank you all. Thank you, David. I'm delighted to be here this evening. This is a topic that is close to my heart. I've actually founded a company based on Stanford technology, and that was a wonderful experience. Not nearly as good as teaching Stanford students, but still a wonderful experience. A question I'm often asked when people come to visit Stanford and Silicon Valley is, what does the university do to promote innovation? How does it contribute? And I tell them, well, you create an environment where creativity flourishes, where innovation can happen. You create an incubator, a place that inspires students and faculty to reach for the stars and do something different. Of course, that goes back a long time in the history of our university. 125 years ago, when Jane and Leland started the university, they had goals that were both practical at the same time idealistic and far-reaching. They believed the university should advance and utilize knowledge for the benefit of society. And of course, they had a strong entrepreneurial spirit. Leland Stanford started as a lawyer, but then he came to the West Coast to California, became not a gold miner, but a shopkeeper supplying to people in the gold fields, and eventually a railroad builder, before he turned to public service and founding our university. And we have cultivated that creativity and innovation from the earliest days with our faculty. Generations of university leaders, faculty, and students have advanced new discoveries and technologies to create new opportunities. And if you come to this campus, that entrepreneurial spirit, that willingness to change and try something new is present in every corner of the campus, in every one of our 7 schools. And the university has also changed. It's changed to adapt to the needs of society. It's become known as one of the innovation centers of the world. In a study in 2012, it was estimated that members of the Stanford community have founded more than 39,000 companies and nonprofits since the 1930s, ranging from HP to Cisco to The Gap to IDEO to Zello to nonprofits like Nora Health and Embrace. Today, we announced another initiative to help prepare world leaders, to help prepare students who would become future world leaders. The Hennessy Knight Scholars Program is an ambitious new graduate-level program that will bring students from around the world to study on our campus, to learn how we think about innovation and changing the world. It will also bring much-needed financial support to graduate students in every sector of the university. Those students will have an opportunity to thrive here on our campus, and we hope go back to lead change for the better in their countries around the world. Certainly that spirit of entrepreneurship and the willingness to innovate is a key part of what we hope that we will embed in these future scholars. Just as Jane and Leland Stanford were committed to serving the greater good when they established this university 125 years ago, the alumni and students of today are committed to look for ways to make a difference. And this symposium offers some great examples. We've brought together a group of alumni who founded a variety of organizations to share insights about their journeys. Moderating the conversation will be Ron Johnson. Ron is founder and CEO of a new personal commerce platform, Enjoy, as well as the founding partner of Johnson & Partners, a venture firm. Ron has an instinct for what consumers really are after. In fact, as a member of Apple's executive team, he founded its retail strategy and helped create the Apple stores. He's a Stanford alum, class of 1980, and currently serves on Stanford's Board of Trustees and also our hospital board. I look forward to what I'm sure will be a lively discussion. Please join me in welcoming Ron Johnson.
Thank you, John. Welcome, everybody. You enjoyed the video, didn't you? Good, good. Tonight we're celebrating founders. And as John mentioned, the original founders here were Leland and Jane. And their objective was none other than to make sure this university right here had a great impact on the world. And tonight's panelists who we're going to meet, people who founded companies, are perfect examples of that. We have 5 founders, most with relatively young companies, and today 1 in 10 people in the world use a product that one of these 5 companies founded. And these things impact things from our healthcare, to our ability to connect with one another through like Instagram, to our ability to enjoy life through original content, through how we watch TV, mobily, on televisions, to things such as how we can help people escape abject poverty, not through a handout, but through a helping hand. These are incredible people, but as John mentioned, they're just 5 of many entrepreneurs here at Stanford. John talked about why this happens at Stanford, and I'd like to share my perspective. You see, Stanford's a really unique place. It's in the center of the Silicon Valley, but when you look at why this is the undisputed place in the world where innovation happens, it mainly is because of Stanford and the connections that Stanford has to companies and to people that work here. And there's 2 things that go together to make it happen. One is values, or our values, and one is leadership. John talked about this. Stanford has always valued the unlimited capacity of the human mind. Stanford has always valued collaboration. This university has always had a spirit, has treasured optimism. And lastly, people persevere here. These kind of values propel our students that are here tonight, our alums, our researchers, our investigators. But values are important, but perhaps the secret ingredient is the leadership that's been present at this university for decades. And there's no better example than John. I think a lot of people think of John as an incredible university president, which he is. But I think a lot of people think of him as perhaps the most impactful entrepreneur in the Valley. You see, with John, an entrepreneurship is a way of life. He has an approach to life that always includes embracing the future. He's always had the courage to pursue original ideas. He places incredible value on intelligence and research and knowledge. He's bold, he takes risks, he bets on people, and he perseveres. And so when I look at John, I don't see just a great university president. I see an entrepreneur that sets the standards for all of us. And there's really no greater example of that than in John's 16th year. Today, we're all part of it. We announced the most ambitious graduate fellowship program in the history of higher education. Now, the people you'll meet tonight started their companies with about $15 million in seed capital. This new initiative has capital of $750 million to make it happen. I call that a big startup. So thank you, John. As moderator tonight, my goal is really simple. It's to get out of the way and let you learn from our panelists. My hope is you'll learn something, you'll be inspired, you'll wake up tomorrow with a thought that might propel you forward. And so let's get started. What we're going to do tonight is I'm going to lead a discussion for a little while with some prepared questions, and then be prepared. We'll turn it over to you to give you a chance to ask questions of your own, and then we'll wrap it up. So our first panelist, I'd like you to welcome Tristan Walker.
As co-founder and CEO of Walker & Company brands, Tristan Walker aims to simplify health and beauty for people of color. Tristan grew up in Queens, New York, and won a scholarship to Hotchkiss School in Connecticut. He graduated as valedictorian with a degree in economics from Stony Brook University and received his MBA from Stanford in 2010. Tristan also co-founded and chairs Code 2040, which works to create opportunity in Silicon Valley for top Latino and African American coders and software engineers.
Please welcome KIAH Williams.
KIAH Williams is co-founder and director of the nonprofit SIRUM. Originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, KIAH received a Bachelor of Arts in Science, Technology, and Society, as well as a master's degree in sociology from Stanford in 2007. Today, SIRUM has distributed more than 2 million units of medicine to more than 85,000 people.
Please welcome Mike KRIEGER, Instagram.
Mike KRIEGER is co-founder and chief technology officer of Instagram, a global online community of more than 400 million users that transforms and shares more than 80 million photos every day. A native of Sao Paulo, Brazil, Mike moved to California, where he received a bachelor's degree from Stanford in 2008 and a master's degree in symbolic systems in 2009. He also met co-founder Kevin Systrom at Stanford. Mike and his wife Caitlin announced a partnership with the Open Philanthropy Project last year and are active in supporting the arts and education in San Francisco, where they live.
Our next panelist is Jessica JACKLEY.
Okay.
Linking altruism with technology, Jessica JACKLEY promotes financial inclusion, the sharing economy, and social justice. Originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Jessica graduated with a degree in philosophy and political science from Bucknell University. She received her MBA from Stanford's Graduate School of Business in 2007. After spending time with a nonprofit organization in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, she co-founded KIVA, the world's first peer-to-peer microlending website, in 2005.
And finally, last but not least, the other old guy on stage, Reed Hastings. founder of Netflix.
As co-founder and CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings has transformed home entertainment. Born in Boston, Massachusetts, Reed graduated from Bowdoin College and then taught math in Swaziland with a Peace Corps. He returned to the U.S. and earned a master's degree in artificial intelligence from Stanford in 1988. Reed is passionate about education. He's an educational philanthropist and a former president of the California State Board of Education.
Well, as moderator, I had the advantage of being able to write questions without telling them. So their answers will be live and on the spot, but hopefully some of the questions will be helpful to you. So one of the great questions is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And when I think of starting a company, there are a lot of people who start a company because they want to start a company. They want to found something. There are other people who have an idea that is so essential to their core that the only way to bring it out is to start a company. And I'd like to start by asking the panelists, maybe Tristan go first. What was it, the chicken or the egg?
Probably the chicken.
Yeah.
Specifically because I didn't have any idea what I was doing. There was no gestation period, right? I just needed to get out and do it, right? I realized a couple things. Number one, I'm a terrible employee. I've either gotten fired or had to quit every single job that I've had. And that was a function of my really wanting to do something incredibly ambitious, right? I worked on Wall Street. I have very humble beginnings. I grew up in Queens, New York, born and raised, right? Projects, welfare, et cetera. And I realized I had one goal in life, and that was to be as wealthy as possible, as quickly as possible, right? I realized that there are 3 ways to do it. The first was to be an actor or an athlete. That didn't work out for me too well at all. The second way was to work on Wall Street. Completely hated it. And the last way, I was like, damn, I've already exhausted 2 of the 3. The last one is entrepreneurship. And unfortunately, very lucky, very fortunate, I said I wanted to get as far away from Wall Street, literally and figuratively, as possible. Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean. There's this fantastic school called Stanford. Let me apply. And fortunately, I applied to the business school and got in. And it wasn't really until I got to Silicon Valley, and this is the first time that I knew that Silicon Valley existed, that I knew I wanted to be a part of it. And the real catalyst was my being 24 at the time and realizing that there are other 24-year-olds here, not only fundamentally changing the world, but like participating in the wealth creation. And I knew I wanted to be a part of that. So chicken.
Chicken. Jessica, I think you're an egg.
I'm still trying to figure out what chicken and egg mean in this analogy.
They
like,
probably
I'm just
mean
gonna
nothing,
tell you.
but, yeah.
So I definitely was an accidental entrepreneur. In fact, I remember we shopped the idea around for KIVA, for example, to several organizations and said, have you guys thought of this? Would you want to do it? And for anybody unfamiliar, peer-to-peer microfinance, there was a lot of aversion to the idea of lending to some random person in the middle of where we began, East Africa at the time. And so there was a lot of pushback, and so we tried to just kind of give the idea away or do the idea for free with other nonprofits, but there wasn't a lot of interest. So in the end, we sort of had to start the organization to try to get this thing out into the world and see what would happen.
But Jessica, even when you were a young girl,
Yes.
you know, I've read your book. It's a wonderful book, by the way.
Okay, that makes me so happy that you read the book. That's so nice of you to say.
No,
Thank you so much.
And you
Thank
should
you.
read it. It goes, tell them the title.
Clay, water, brick, and
Clay, water,
then
brick.
finding inspiration from entrepreneurs who do
But
the
when I
most
read
with the
that, it
least.
sounded to me like when you were a young girl,
Yeah.
you cared deeply about poverty. And that was an issue
did.
that you were aware of, you volunteered for, you were sensitive to. That's been a lifetime passion,
That's
correct?
totally true, and I thought that had absolutely nothing to do with entrepreneurship. I thought entrepreneurship was about taking, no offense to my fellow panelists here, but I thought it was about creating a machine in the world that could create value and then you could take stuff for yourself, and I wanted to be a giver. I felt very grateful, I felt really lucky in my life, and I wanted to do that. And so it seemed to me, and I was incorrect, but for a long time I had this false dichotomy of nonprofits and for-profits, and
Right.
entrepreneurs seemed like the gang leaders, like the worst of the worst, because they were starting companies, like for-profits. And so I wanted to be the opposite of that. So it took me a while to come around to the idea of entrepreneurship being something that could help individuals living in poverty, and that it could be something that I could do myself. So I was definitely, what would that make me? Was that an egg answer?
I don't know which it is, but
Yeah.
you clearly had a passion to solve global poverty, and this was a vehicle to do
Yeah,
it.
it
Is
was.
that fair?
That's absolutely fair.
Kia, you're more like Jessica, right?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm the only one on this panel who was supposed to be a doctor. Anyone else? Okay. So, I was always interested in healthcare, had just seen, grew up in West Philly, had seen just how, healthcare access was this fundamental gap that was happening in our own backyard. And, so I thought, of course, I think especially when you go to a public school or any school in the US and you're a person of color who's good at math and science, they're like, engineer, doctor, this is your life plan. So I thought, of course I'm gonna go, get into a good school and be a physician, and that's how I'm going to, give back. I think coming to Stanford just opened my eyes to so many other ways that giving back, what that even meant. I was fortunate enough to get a lot of funded internships through the Haas Center for Public Service to work at a lot of different nonprofits, foundations, et cetera. And, but what really was the turning point was actually meeting my co-founders, and we kind of had looked at from Adam's academic research, looking at how much medicine was going to waste, and George's bent in policy and wanting to figure out well, how can we redistribute this? And we kind of came across this problem that $5 billion of unused medicine is going to waste, and 50 million people can't afford the drugs that they need. This is the United States of America, and this is still happening today. So I think for us, it became a, if not us, then who? Because no one's doing this. This problem has existed, and it's only getting bigger. The issue's only getting bigger. The problem's only getting bigger. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? So when we started SIRUM, George had done a PhD at Stanford, left his postdoc. Adam did one semester at Harvard Business School, and I had a full-time job at the Clinton Foundation doing other work I was really interested in, but it was kind of this we had this opportunity, and the answer had to be, we're gonna do this now.
Yeah, and if you didn't do it, no one else even knew the gap existed.
Exactly.
So that's great. Mike, how about you?
When we started Instagram, we were in a startup incubator. It's called Dogpatch Labs. It was in the city, and it was fun because you got to see a bunch of chickens and a bunch of eggs, or it was an egg hatchery, whatever those were called. And you kind of got both extremes, and I guess I came to believe you need a little bit of both. So there were people who were there because it was 2010. Fundraising was relatively easy for very early stage. It wasn't necessarily easier for later stage. And you just saw a bunch of people that were like, I really want to do a startup because that sounds like a cool thing to do. Not like I'm really ambitious and I can't hold a job because I'm ambitious, but more like, I don't really want a boss, like that kind of attitude. And it would just, like, the slide was gradual, right? It was like, what are you working on? I'm like, I don't know, we're like exploring, doing this stuff. And then like 3 months later, like I'd come in and they'd be playing Fight Night 3, which is this boxing video game, like every day. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? And they're just like not having a boss. So that was one extreme. And they're not around anymore. But like the I guess sad or like challenging part is at the other extreme, which is like the total passion isn't really a predictor for success either, at least not per company. It might be per career. I think Dennis from Foursquare is an example. Tristan, you work with, like, he's been like trying to get the same thing done for a long time, and like I think that's persistence what's kept him going. But yeah, so there's the timing of your personal passion, but also there's a thing that made us want to do these things, and it's not just, hey, like I don't want a boss, or like I'm like tired of working at a big company. It's like problem to solve, and that can come a little bit later, but just like feeling that there's something unique about the way you work or the way you work with somebody that is like worth trying and applying to a problem. So it's a little bit of both.
So for you, it's part of who your co-founders were, how you worked together, the challenge of doing something great together.
And I always say, like, and this is become a little bit of a cliche among like founders, is saying like, hey, like if I were to start another company, I say this, but I really mean it. Like if tomorrow Instagram like went up in a puff of air and it was like Men in Black, like it never existed, like the founding team would be the same. Like I'd pick the same people, and especially my co-founder, like we get along really well and we complement each other very well. So there is that as well, which is like this team should do good things. It might not necessarily be this good thing. Hopefully it is, and if not, it's another thing. The trick is not burning
I think that's kind of like a rooster. I think we got a third category here. It's the team. Reed, now Netflix was number 2, correct?
Correct, but in both companies, I would say I was pure product.
Yeah.
The company is a necessary vehicle to support a product vision that was exciting. And for me, it's like what they say about being a writer, that you should only do it if you can't imagine any other thing. So you should do a product idea if you're willing to give up everything to see that product through, because it's caught your passion in a way. And then you do a lot building companies and hiring people to be able to see the product mature and grow.
But it's a product vision and a passion to do a product, and it just takes time.
Yep.
Right? Well, speaking of time, it's interesting. I worked at Apple for a dozen years, and people say, what was it like to work at a great company for so long? But the reality, for my first 5 years at Apple, at the end of the 5th year, the stock was below where I started it. But we always look at companies and assume it's always been successful. But the truth is there's no such thing as an overnight success. Everything takes time, and it takes certain skills. And Reed, Netflix, 17 years now.
Yep.
Right? And it still, to me, feels like a young company.
Still struggling.
But
That's what you wanted to say.
Does it feel to you, after all these years, like it was hard, it was instant? Tell us about it.
But we've changed, of course. Netflix started as DVD rental just in the US, and now we're a global producer, distributor. And the hard thing are the new shows and building more. We were a domestic company for 14 years, so really transforming the company to think like a global company. And so it's new challenges. But they're tremendously exciting. And I think if you have, like all my panelists and probably all of you, a very restless mind, you're always trying to what's better. And the thing I remind people, employees all the time is, we're really good compared to 5 years ago, but we suck compared to what we're going to be in 5 years. And so you want to celebrate a little bit, that you've made progress, but basically, as a leader, you're setting the agenda of really helping people to see and believe how much better we can be, in some time period.
Well, you're known as a great motivator. I understand you published basically your employee values, and 10 million people have read it online. And is the secret just to tell people you suck and we can do better, or is that?
It's that simple. I should have just boiled it down. I need that whole slide down.
No, it's pretty incredible what Reed's done, and we're not going to get into tonight. But the culture and the way he empowers people and treats people is remarkable. And I encourage you all to look online and read about that, because it's a class in and of itself. Now, Mike, your business kicked in pretty quickly, right?
It did and it didn't. So once we launched Instagram, it did take off quickly, but we were kind of lost in the woods for a good year beforehand. Like, we were caught up in kind of what was really trendy in 2009, 2010. So like location-based startups, LBSs. Like nobody uses that acronym anymore, but it was like, this is when South by Southwest was still like the hotbed, and like every startup would try to launch by South by Southwest. And there's like crazy lead up, and now like if you ever go, it's like insufferable because everybody thinks they're going to be the next company, but like I don't know if a company's broken out of there really in years because it's gotten so noisy. So we definitely spent that year, and a lot of like both the code and the product thinking of the stuff we were working on made its way into Instagram, but it doesn't not necessarily on the surface. So, but yeah, once we launched, it was quick. But the funny thing is, we were ready to actually go on to the third idea after that too. We actually kept the first site up, past the first week of Instagram, because I was waiting for like the traffic to go up, and then everybody would be like, oh, I'm done with this. I'm never coming back again. So, it was far from certain that that was the thing that we were going to get to work on for years to come after that.
But when did you know? When did you know it was going to work?
I am a very worried person. You can ask anybody who knows me. Like I'm always kind of paranoid. So I think I really knew probably last week, maybe. Like it's been years. It's been a while. My co-founder turned to me like 3 weeks in and was like, Mike, I don't know how big this thing is going to be, but I think we're onto something. And I didn't really believe him. And actually it took years for us to have a data science team. And actually if we'd had one earlier, I would have felt better, because the fear I always had was like, we're growing, but are we growing because people are signing up and not coming back? Or we're just growing because there's lots of people in the world? Or are we growing because people really love it? And you look at the data now, you're like, people like who sign up, love it, and come back week over week, and the active people get more active over time. But we didn't have any stats or data early then. We didn't really know what we were doing in that department. So I was like, I hope that's not the case.
That's right. Well, it is interesting that, after a year, it seemed like a long time. I believe the data shows they had 100 million users in year 2 with 2 engineers. That sounds like a pretty successful start to me, but congratulations. Jessica, tell us about KIVA.
Oh, okay. Well, so we launched with our pilot was 7 entrepreneurs.
People know what it is, just 'cause we didn't really.
Sure, so
introduce
anybody
this
with
briefly.
if you have a credit card or a PayPal account, you can go to kiva.org, this is not a commercial, and find an entrepreneur whose story resonates with you and lend $25 or more to them. We did a pilot round, spring to fall of 2005, and that was 7 entrepreneurs and about $3,000. And we spammed our friends and family. It was super low tech. We didn't have online payment processing when we did this pilot round. It was like my grandmother handing me a 20. It was super, not just enough to start. So $3,000 for the pilot. We decided that after 6 months, in the fall of 2005, that they had repaid pretty much, the 7 entrepreneurs in Uganda. So we took the word beta off of the site and we launched for real, which meant we wrote our own press release and put it on the site. And shockingly, shockingly nothing happened for 3 weeks. But then for real, shockingly, in November of 2005, 300 different blogs wrote about what we had been doing. Now, for the record, I had never read a blog at that point, so I was like, what's going on? So suddenly, 2 of the 3 most widely read blogs in the world had read about KIVA, and we'd put a business up on the site, Joseph Onyango, goat herder in Uganda that needs $300, and it would go in seconds, it would be fulfilled in seconds. So that was strange, and that kicked off our first year, October 2005 to October 2006. That was that was a $500,000 year. The next year was 15 million, the next was 40, the next 100, et cetera. And KIVA's nearing $1 billion 10 years out, in these $25 bits from person to person all around the world.
That's incredible. And you had a moment with Oprah, right? That had a small impact? Is
yes,
that right?
back when that was a thing, right? There was the Oprah show. We had 2 years in, I had graduated from business school. So I came to the GSB first, I should just say, I came to Stanford Business School as a staffer, as a temp admin for my first job out of undergrad. And I filed and watched all these amazing people walk through the doors of the business school who were, these luminaries and thought leaders and incredible practitioners. And I thought, entrepreneurship isn't so bad. I want to be like those amazing social entrepreneurs that I saw. So I left, came back as a student right after we'd done that pilot round of loans. So yeah, that's. Did I answer your last question?
You did.
I'm sort of in the rabbit hole now. So that happened.
That's great. And KIAH, it took a little while, right?
Yeah, so I think the blessing and the curse of working within healthcare is that it's highly regulated. So for us, we probably spent the first 6 months to 9 months literally working on legal agreements. Yeah. We're moving medicine So it's regulated. And so like we actually spent a lot of time, me, George, and Adam, just like working on not just the product and the website, but really just like trying to get our ducks in a row to make sure we could do this and people would trust the three of us with handling their drugs. You know, it's going up to pharmacies or nursing homes and hospitals and say, it's okay, trust us. We're gonna use our platform and we're gonna make sure the medicine goes to the right clinics and it's used for low-income patients, you know, who can't afford their meds. I think it was, so it was a lot slower for us. It probably took us a year before we saw like any type of traction to the point where we thought this even has a chance. And I think like for us that first year, almost every week, it was like, oh man, this is not gonna work. And I think, you know, we're in year 5 now, and I think that still happens where you get this moment that it's like, oh, this isn't gonna work. It just happens less often.
Right.
So year 1, it was like every week, or sometimes every day.
Right.
Or for us, there was this one instance where, you know, we were a little bit ahead of legislatures, and we got a big fat cease and desist from the state of California that said, do not operate anymore. This is not legal, donating drugs to poor people. So, you know, that happened, and that was this moment, you know, that was one of the biggest moments in the first couple of years of our work where we were like, yeah, this might not work. And I think what I've learned is, you know, kind of managing my own psychology to say like, okay, you know, settle down, like it might not work. We have a kind of running joke that if we're not redistributing unused medicine, we'll redistribute unused blankets, because no one can get mad at us for doing that. So we say there's SIRUM and SIRUM as our secondary business. So I think it just happens less often. And I think we try to be really intellectually honest and think like, how are things going and how can we make it better and how can we be better today, and be able to say, yeah, we really sucked last year.
Right.
Like that's our goal. I want to be able to start saying we sucked today, but you know, next week we're going to not suck as much.
Yeah.
Now, Tristan's the youngest company on the stage, right? Walker & Company started about
2.5 years ago.
2.5 years ago.
Yep.
And you launched your product?
Yep.
How long ago?
Year and a half ago.
Does it look good?
You look great.
Thank you.
He uses our product, by the way. All right, so there's 2 ways I unpack this conversation. Number 1, how do I think about things as a founder CEO, especially as a sole founder CEO, and then just the business. You know, one thing that I've learned as a founder CEO is that this job is a lot more unglamorous than it is glamorous, right? There are a hell of a lot of troughs, right? There are great peaks, but there are a lot of troughs, right? So the thing that's really important about that is really understanding the lessons in those troughs. And those lessons are in turn blessings, but you know, I'll kind of talk a little bit about that in a second. For the business, so I founded this company, Walker & Company. The goal of Walker & Company is to make health and beauty simple for people of color. People of color being the majority of the world, still treated as a niche consumer. Doesn't make any sense to me. Most culturally influential demographic on the planet, highest spending demographic on the planet as it relates to health and beauty products, et cetera. So we want to build a suite of brands to solve acute health and beauty problems for this very important demographic. You know, we want to build something with as much legacy as a Procter & Gamble or a Johnson & Johnson or a Unilever. Our first brand is a brand called Bevel. And Bevel is the first and only shaving system designed specifically for folks who are prone to shaving irritation, razor bumps, et cetera. We've eradicated the issue. It's a beautiful product. It's a target. I didn't do that on purpose.
That wasn't a problem.
I like that. Thank you. So here's why it's important. I'll never forget this moment when I was an intern on Wall Street. I walked on a trading floor, and I walked through, and I remember there's this guy, type A personality. He stands up. He says, "Hey, you. Take that crap off your face," right? I had hair on my face. And the only reason I had it is because I was so mortified by all the mass market products that exist out there, right? Multi-blade razors, et cetera. If I use them, it breaks out my skin, right? It's terrible, right? Saps my confidence, among other things. So right away, we're swimming upstream by developing kind of a razor and telling these folks who are prone to these issues to put razors on their faces. Like, it's crazy, right? But not only that, right? It took us about a year to really believe that we were onto something. And the reason why we started to believe that we were onto something is because we hear our customer stories, of which there were 3. And these are the only 3 stories that I need to hear to know that, like, we got to keep pushing. The first came from a woman. She's a single mom. She said, "Thank you, Tristan, for finally teaching single moms how to teach their sons how to shave." Right? Like, that's a rite of passage everyone deserves, right? Like, that's my story. I didn't have a father to teach me how to shave the right way. That's important. Another gentleman About 4 months ago, he sent me an email. He's in the Army, and you got to shave every day, right? And he said, Tristan, for as long as I can remember, issues related to razor bumps, ingrown hairs, et cetera, have been as big a part of my military career as my uniform. I'm like, thank you for finally having a product that works. The one that really made me cry, a gentleman, he said, Tristan, for 15 years, and he works on Wall Street, for 15 years I've been donning a beard to work, right? And I feel like it's limited my career advancement. Right? Like, thank you for finally having a product that works. Those are only 3 stories I need to hear, right? I don't need 100 million users. You're awesome. You should have realized that a hell of a lot sooner. But those are the 3 stories that I need to hear that just know that we're on to something pretty special. Now, as a CEO, founder CEO, I'm paranoid every day, right? And I love that line because I think it's right and incredibly poignant. But this is all about peaks and troughs. But those stories are the peaks that I need to get through those troughs to the next one. Right?
That's great. Thank you, Tristan. That's really good.
Tristan, can I ask you, it's convenient because of what Andy Grove said a long time ago to think that we should be paranoid as CEOs. But what I have found is that paranoid are delusional people. And that actually being a CEO is much harder than being schizophrenic or delusional. And it's about separating what are the real threats and what could grow into a real threat or opportunity from what isn't. And so it's more like how you play chess and not as a computer, but as a human, which is there's an amazing number of possibilities, and you're trimming the tree of possibilities constantly so you can follow certain paths to quite a great depth. And you're hoping that you trimmed correctly. In other words, that you're not following this, and if you trim incorrectly, you do get checkmated. And that's really the art of strategy for us, is to be thoughtful about what avenues we explore with your teams to significant depth versus, don't seem probable enough that you're going to ignore and separate. And so that tight judgment is the key thing. And I know it's probably what you mean, but since you brought up the schizophrenia.
Well, for more clarity, I mean, so one of our investors, Andreessen Horowitz, Ben Horowitz, he's a great friend and mentor of mine, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, the job as a CEO is to make high quality decisions at a high velocity. That is hard. It's really hard, right? Like, I can't think of many other jobs or just things in my life where I'm required to do that consistently, right? Like, that is tough. So that probably kind of gets more at the core of it in terms of my own personal paranoia. Makes sense.
But let me ask a question. There's a big debate in the Valley about strategy. Some people say it doesn't matter in a startup. You can't see far enough ahead. It's all about learning. Steve was that way. Steve Jobs at Apple, just let's do one thing really well, and when we do that, that will create another opportunity for us. Remember his commencement address, you can't connect the dots looking forward, you only can looking back. So Apple became the most valuable company in the world without really a strategy. There were values. We're going to produce insanely great products that change the world. They're going to be easy to use. But it wasn't like we're going to produce an iPod, and then we'll bring out a phone, and then we'll get iOS, and then we'll have apps. That all just happened one decision at a time. And how do you all think about when you start a company? What's your framework? What's the importance of strategy versus sort of that day-to-day execution and adaptability or being agile? Mike, you look like you got an opinion.
It's there's like a military quote of like, planning is essential, plans are useless kind of thing. Like, you need to know, the metaphor we use internally on is flight plans. Like, you'd never take off, or I don't think you take off like having no flight plan, but if there's a storm, you need to know how to steer, and like, you need to have, I guess, a fair amount of conviction around how you fly a plane. So I think we try to differentiate between roadmaps where we plan, most of our planning is done at like 8-week increments, and we do half planning, but even those tend to change. From strategy, which to us is more like, what's our unique take on things? Like, why are we here? I'm actually really curious to hear from Reid, like the differentiate between like roadmap and strategy, like the idea being like, what value are you delivering, and like what role, like the phrase that we use as business school. I feel like I went to business school just from reading like and absorbing all my business school friends. But like, what job are you being hired for, right? It's the Clay Christensen sort of concept, which is like, what job do people hire Instagram for? How do we get really, really good at that? So like, while Apple, for example, might not have like the iPod and then iPhone and then iPad and then iPad Pro, like there was the strategy of, well, if we keep doing this thing really well and like we know what our core values is, that propels you forward, and that ends up being a lot more evergreen than plans. Like it would be funny to look at like what we consider. We were like asked to do a 3-year roadmap 3 years ago, and I would love to find it because I'm sure it is completely different than what we actually ended up doing. And I bet there's not a single thing on there that we actually ended up doing, because things really changed, and like video's happening faster than we expected. So we went deeper on video. But it is important to say, like, let's not try to do anything, and to your point about paranoia, also not try to beat everyone. Like, there's other people who are going to be in the market that are going to be good, and they're being good because they're making trade-offs that maybe if you make, you're going to make your own product worse, but they wish they can make your trade-offs in other ways. So that's how we end up trying to differentiate it, and try to keep the planning really, really short, but the strategy a little bit more evergreen.
Got it. Anybody else have thoughts on that? Strategy versus...
What we always say internally is strategy is pain. And if it doesn't feel painful, it's not being strategic. So if you have overwhelming force, to use a military metaphor, you don't really need a strategy. You just charge in on all fronts and you win. And when you need strategy is when you don't have overwhelming force and you make scary trade-offs, like we're going to leave the northern border undefended and put all the troops on the southern border, and hopefully that works out for you. And if it's not profoundly painful and scary to like leave this northern border undefended, then it's not really a strategy. And so we tried to make it the not list in our strategy of all the things we're not doing. And if we're wrong about that, like early on for Netflix, it was movies. We were all about movies. We were DVDs, Sundance, movies. TV show is like, oh, that was other stuff. Eventually we realized, no, actually TV show is most of the job that's being filled of entertainment and relaxation, and that we should expand our definition. And so that was when we included it, but we still do lots of nots, like not sport and not news. And those are painful decisions, because not 100% clear that we shouldn't be doing those, but we still make very firm decisions not to. So that's why I think it's useful to think of strategy as the painful list of the things that we're not doing.
Yeah, it's more important what you don't do, so everyone's focused on what you need to do. Yeah, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I want to say in the beginning with SIRUM, I think our strategy was just try everything and anything to see if it will work. And I think it was literally just if we had an inbound request, like, okay, well, we'll see what we can do for this. We'll go knock on doors at every hospital, every nursing home, every pharmacy, and basically see, can we get them to donate medicine? How's this gonna work? And just build out processes and, probably, promise on some, yeah, we've got features that'll help you do that. Yeah, we've got these inventory management. And I think much to our CTO's chagrin, we'd be out, promising that we had features that we were pretty sure could be built in the next week. Right. And I think it's interesting because the last year or so, as SIRUM has become more established, I feel like we finally have our feet more on the ground. We're operating in 4 states. We're moving about $200,000 of medicine every month. We've kind of had to shift to think more about, okay, we could keep doing the same thing. And right now we're doubling the size of our program pretty steadily. But we're actually starting to think more about how do we build strategies that are 10x or 100x. And I think that's where I've really had to just shift how I spend my day, how I think about what our priorities should be, because it's not just, okay, let's add on a new state, let's add on 5 more clinics, let's add on 10 more medicine donors. It's how do we start doing things that could blow up what we currently have, which for me is very scary because I'm probably very paranoid. I'm like the Debbie Downer. I literally get called the Debbie Downer of our team because I'm the one who pokes holes in stuff all the time. Every time someone has an idea, they come to KIAH and say, what's wrong with this? And that's what I do. I give them the list of what's wrong with that idea. But I think we're starting to get into this phase where we have our feet under the ground, and now it's how do we go from a good, innovative small idea to changing the face of healthcare and medicine access for the entire United States.
Right.
And I think that's a really hard transition that we're currently, working through. And I feel like that's where the pain is now coming from. It's not, do we grow or not grow? Do we have a strategy? Do we not have a strategy? But are we investing our time and resources in something that could literally change the face of what we're doing?
Right. Interesting. Well, you can read a lot online about each of these people and their business decisions. So I'd like to turn to some more personal questions because we're all within the Stanford family. Everyone went to Stanford. And the first one won't be that personal, but people say that when you start a company, it becomes like a child. It's like one of your children. Well, if you had to adopt another child that exists today, which company would you adopt and why?
Wait, what is so as a parent?
It's not a chicken or egg.
The chicken has the
Yeah,
egg.
we're gonna let Jess go first.
I wanna
She's
be
got
like the
3
cool
children.
auntie. I want to be like, I drop in when I can and like give some presents and because I don't
Now,
know.
is there a company
board of directors
that,
is
you know, when
pretty-
you look around, you obviously know a lot of people. You see companies at different phases, different stages. You think about it. If you couldn't run, what would you want to do?
The one I love the most, I'm on the board of, is a nonprofit called KIPP Charter Schools. About 180 charter schools, K-12 schools across America. And what's been incredible is that as they grow, they're actually learning faster. So the initial founders were afraid of getting big because they thought it'd become bureaucratic like a school district. And instead what they found is they can learn in each of the schools and then cross-fertilize. And so it's just an amazing group of people that are changing U.S. K-12 education, and it's so much fun.
Do you think someday you might do something like that, lead a non-for-profit, or who knows?
Yeah, it definitely could.
Yeah.
It would be really exciting, like our President Hennessy with his announcement today.
Right. That's great. Jessica, what would you do if you weren't?
Okay, so you're asking me which company would I want to like adopt as?
Yeah, if you
This
could
is
adopt
a
and
very
lead.
big commitment. I have 3 sons that are 4, yes, twins, and a baby that's 1. So I'm like, I feel like we're okay for right now. You know, one organization I've been watching and cheering on for a while. I don't have a formal involvement with it, but is Samasource. There's a founder, Lila Jana. She sort of founded this header company, this meta company, Sama Group, and she has several social enterprises within it. She's really, among other things, trying to rethink what work will be, what it should be, what it's becoming, and how to include, how to basically give work to those that, among many other things, need a job. So she's doing really innovative things there, but I just don't know if I want to become a parent to anything else right this second. So.
Right. And what was her name again? What was the company?
Lila Jana.
Everyone catch that? If you
Yeah,
wanna look it
she's
up?
awesome. She's
Thank
great.
you. Mike, how about you?
Ooh. I think one of the fun things I've gotten to do a little bit in the last couple of years is do a teeny bit of angel investing. So it's not quite like adopting. I think you're more like the somewhat cool uncle, maybe, like hopes to be. But one company that we've got involved with that I'm excited about is also in the healthcare space, and they did a bunch of research. Their name is Remedy, and they found that basically like billing in healthcare is completely broken, and in some like the percentage of that they found kind of varies, but it's up to 30% of medical bills have some error on them, like a coding error or some kind of billing. And it turns out like this is just screwing everybody. But like I don't know if you've ever gotten a healthcare bill; they're inscrutable. You're like, I don't know, like how much did I pay? I don't know. So it's fun to see them sort of get through that process. Basically, it's a cool combination of an interesting problem that I think is worth solving, but also like that stage of company where you're not sure if it's going to work out, and they are trying everything, and they are doing the, hey, we're not going to automate this at all. Like, we're literally going to like look at these bills ourselves and see if we can catch mistakes, and if we can catch mistakes, maybe we can get, actually train an algorithm to catch these mistakes. So there's something really fun about that early, like, big problem, unclear if it's going to be solved, and like, just do it yourself. Like I actually try to get our company to think more about that sometimes. Like we were tracking down a bug once and the team was like, I don't know, we crawled through the logs and like we couldn't like get the reproduction, like we couldn't reproduce this bug. I'm like, have you tried asking somebody who hit it? And like went on Twitter, like at message 5 people, within an hour we'd fix the bug because we just engaged. And like it's easy to, I mean, to your point about KIPP, like it's easy to start thinking like a big organization, get bogged down in process, but a lot of the stuff that works is like, just try it yourself, fake it, and see if it like is valuable, and then you worry about scaling it to whatever size you need it to.
That's great.
I don't know if I can name a specific company so much as the area of interest that I just generally have, and SIRUM fits a lot of this, is how do we improve healthcare delivery in the United States? So I think like, in the way future, I would love to get involved in, how do we create more patient-centered, consumer-centered models of care. We have, so much of the population has a chronic disease, diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia. Medicine access is really important to treat those, but there are other ways of like just things that you don't need to go into a doctor for, and that you could probably kind of handle on your own if you had a little bit of assistance. And so I think just in general, I'm super interested in how do we transform specifically things like primary care in the United States and make it easier for working moms, working parents, like parents with, parents with kids, just even hearing my co-founder talk about, we had to take our kid to the hospital last night, and what do we do with the other kid? And do we wake them up and take them with us, or wait till my parents get here in an hour? I just think there are so many inefficiencies in the healthcare system that I feel like I want to just devote all of my time to fixing these things like billing. Like there was also another study that showed if you actually ask for an itemized bill from like a surgery, you'll usually get the price down like somewhere like 20%, just by asking for an itemized bill.
Yeah.
Like it's the only industry right now where you go in, something happens, and then 6 months later you get a bill for it. You would never do that if you bought a car and then 6 months later someone's like, oh yeah, you owe us another $5,000 for that car that you've been driving around in. So I think there's just so many interesting areas within the healthcare and delivery services area that like this is really what I'm super interested in, just spending my life trying to fix.
Right. That's great.
Instagram before they sold to Facebook. I was speaking specifically economically. So I was a bit conflicted by this answer. I was actually thinking about like choosing Netflix, but then I was like, they're doing pretty well. I would suck it up. So the thing I care a lot about is just product. Right? Like I live a lot of my life through like wire quotes, and there's like this really great quote from Stringer about, it's like just about the product, focus on the product. So there are two companies I admire. Number one is really Netflix, specifically because the product is just so like amazing. But the other one I really think about, and I'm really inspired by Jeff Bezos at Amazon. What's the product? The product is service. Right? And when I think about what we're doing and the level of ambition that we're trying to accomplish, you really can't do that without great service, right? And the thing I think that they've done really well is creating a high-performing culture as it relates to service. That can be applied to every single industry, right? So to be able to learn that, understand it, and apply it to anything that I do, I think would serve me quite well.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Just a couple more, and then we'll turn over to the audience. A lot of Stanford people here, if you could get to do a do-over, you know, in your time at Stanford, some of you were undergrads, some grad students. If there's one thing you do differently that would help you in your job, what would that be?
Can I start?
Yeah, please.
Slow down. I mean, the one thing about Stanford, which I love and appreciate, is that once you get on campus, you want to start something like right away, right? And I'll never forget when I was at the business school, I worked full time as like in my second year of business school. And I realized, and I don't know if this really applies to undergrad as well, but I'm pretty sure probably it does. When you come to schools like this, there are really only three things that you can focus on, right? There's academic, social, and professional. And I really believe you can only do two well, right? Where people really fail is when they try and do all three. So for me, it was like academic, professional, and then I really like just killed my social. I didn't think about that at all. But I reflect back on it, it's like, man, if I slowed down a little bit, right, and really got to know my classmates a hell of a lot more, like how much more rewarding would that have been? And these ideas aren't going anywhere, right? And the one thing I observed with a lot of Stanford classmates and even kind of folks across the street at other schools, that folks were in a rush. It's like, why, right? You're brilliant already, right? Like brilliance still begets patience in a lot of ways. So slow down, like don't be in a rush, and I think you'll be much better off as a result.
Yeah, it's really, you look at what John's doing now, starting a new initiative, you know, a lot of experience. There's a lot of time in your career. So enjoy the moment and slow down.
100%.
Honestly, that was the kind of answer I wanted to give. I remember all of the activities.
You can't, he already took it.
I know, but I'll
kidding.
double down. All of the activities, like all of the clubs that I was a part of, I remember they were very like, you know, you could write goals about them or something. And I remember talking to a friend, and I was like going off to my like kind of serious club or meeting or whatever activity I was doing. And a lot of time also was spent doing KIVA in nights and weekends. But I remember they were going to like the wine club, and I was like, why would you ever do that? What's the goal there? It was so terrible. So I would have done, I just was so like, I'm gonna get my money's worth out of this experience. I'm gonna like learn everything I can. I'm gonna take extra class. I'm just gonna, you know, go crazy with the academic experience, like you said. Yeah. And then try to survive, like doing KIVA as our little side project on nights and weekends. And I would have done the same thing. I would have just invested more in the relationships around me and allowed myself to enjoy a little bit more. Yeah.
Right. Mike?
I look back now at the classes I remember are often not the ones that were really relevant to my degree. I was a SimSys student, which is saying a lot because like basically almost everything is relevant to SimSys. So, but like I look back and like the classes that stayed with me was doing Art 60, which was like visual arts, and you're like really having to stretch yourself. And I was the worst student in the class because everybody else was an art major, and I was like in this like kind of sissy technical thing, and I tried my best, but like it really pushed me. And like when are you going to take an art? I mean, I guess I can make the time for it these days, but I know that I won't. So like, there's no other time in your life where like you can mix and match like the stuff that's going to be really directly relevant. And you kind of know what that is to like, yeah, getting to take that. I took a class on like communist, like the post-communist societies of Eastern Europe from a guy that had lived through that in Romania. And like, again, that stuff stays with you, and like, it ends up informing something that you do later on if you're gonna go for the goal side of it. There's something relevant in there. And like, I know Art 60 actually did, and it changed the way I look at things visually, but I miss that. And nowadays I try to complement it with books, but you miss the opportunity of having people to talk to about it, which you really get when you're actually in a class. So going wider, I had a similar, like I'm from Brazil, and I notice this about a lot of my international student friends. Like, you get here and you're like, it's such a privilege to be here. Like, we are loading up. We are taking 22 units every quarter, and I did. Like, I finished. Like, I was done in 3 years basically because of that. And like, I'm not sure that was the right thing because it was all very tactical. And then last year I was like, no, like, what are the classes I wish I would have taken the whole time?
Great.
I might have been the least academic student like on this panel. I did a lot of the social. So my Stanford experience was really, really fun.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So there are no regrets on the social side at all. And that's actually where I like met one of my co-founders, fiance, like best friends. I would say
Did you say Beyonce or fiance?
Fiance.
I wasn't quite sure.
I don't think that Queen Bee has been at the campus yet, but I would say a couple of things. One, I would have focused less on what I thought I ought to be doing, and more on what I wanted to do. And I think what I mean by that is I was very wrapped up in like who I thought I was supposed to be. I thought I was supposed to be this like serious pre-med student who's supposed to, then go to med school and kind of go on that path. And there were so many signs that was not the right path for me. And to some extent, I didn't listen to those. I would have given myself more space to take cool classes just because I wanted to. I might have switched to having a comparative literature minor, if I could go back and do it again. I would have really kind of focused on other things that I was interested in. The other thing I would say is, and I think you get more of this when you get older, but it's just don't do stuff that you don't care about. Like literally, if you don't care about it, don't do it. Who cares if it's on your resume? Who cares if it looks good for a job? I think to some extent I realized that Stanford's a tough place. If you don't enjoy it, if you're not interested, you're not gonna be good at it. And I think I saw that, in academics, there were classes I were taking that I wasn't interested in, and so you don't put the time forth. I would have only spent time on things that I loved doing. And I think what I learned at Stanford was what I loved doing was like creating new initiatives, creating programs. So I actually got really involved in public service in the Black community at Stanford. And I think those are the best things that I did on campus, was like leading organizations like the NAACP. And then spending time at the Haas Center and like getting funded to do, public service initiatives. Like those are things that were really important, and those are the things that taught me the most about management, leadership, presentation, just all the soft skills that you don't necessarily get in the classroom. So I would say, the things I would say is, only do things that actually matter to you. If you're not willing to get up at 9 a.m. for that 9 a.m. class and take it and go to that class, you probably don't want to be in that class. So if you're not willing to do that, you should probably withdraw.
And 9 a.m. used to be early. Is that early?
That's like the early in class.
I'm ready for my nap.
That's our early class.
Okay. Oh my God.
And then I think just giving yourself time to not know what you want to do and being okay with that. I think Stanford's very much a place where you can get very caught up in this like accolade acquisition. You can get tracked on these paths because you think like, yes, I'm going to be an investment banker, and this is what this means, and I'm going to go to business school, and then I'm going to do this.
But
and I think
it all sounds really good. But the reality, each of you are successful, and you did take 22 credits, and you weren't social. You worked your tail off and did things, and you were focused on KIVA while going to school. So how do you know? I know the advice is slow down, meet friends, be social, try new things, learn how to draw. But how do you know? I'm just asking. Are you 100% confident that if you had done those things, you would be as successful or where you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's always an assumption that we can't do it a year later.
Right.
It's like, why? I mean,
Yeah.
Sure we can, right? I think the reason why a lot of us rush into it is because we assume that other folks are going to do the thing that we wanted to do within that time.
Right.
And that's rarely the case.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Reed, same thing? Yeah.
Same thing.
All right, same thing. All right.
Can I add something though? Because like, I think I have a lot to thank this place for. Like, it's crazy what it's done for me. And the one thing, I think we've been speaking very much in our silos of like the school we were a part of. Mm-hmm. The thing that makes Stanford, at least at the graduate level, because I didn't come here as an undergrad, the thing that makes it so special, our school is like right here. Literally, you go across the street, you have the top law school, business school, medical school, like engineering school, design school, right? You just walk in those places and you can collaborate, right? And I've never been in a place with as much density of like brilliance. And I think folks, and I mean that, like folks don't take as much advantage of that. And I did, I would have done it more.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So every student here had to write in their Stanford application a letter to their roommate. If you had to write a letter to your co-founder, what would you write?
Don't have a co-founder.
He had a single. What would be that, characteristic you'd want to make sure that co-founder knew about you?
Okay, I feel like I just need to say it. So I've done KIVA and then several startups after, and they've all been a blast. I think the thing that I wish I would have been a better judge about, and actually maybe every situation, is just being clear about roles, but also about where we shared values, because I think that's core. You can't move forward with somebody unless you do share the same values. And ideally, you have the same vision of where you're going. That's good too. But I think it's always helpful to clarify, where you're the same and where you're different. And ideally, where you're different are in skills and are in abilities and perspectives, maybe, and the information that you bring to the table, so that you can see problems with a richer, fuller perspective. So I think just clarifying that stuff at the beginning, which requires knowing who you are and knowing who you're not. To your point earlier about saying yes and saying no to things, just really having a lot of self-awareness about who you are, what you're really good at, what you can bring, and where you need to, the parts that you need to work on. I think bringing that sooner and in a clearer way would have been helpful.
For me, it'd be easy. I'd write 10 values, of which 2 of them would be courage and loyalty. And I'd ask the person to circle it, and if those 2 aren't circled, we can't rock. Right? Like, for me, those are the 2 most important, at least, values that I value. Number 1, courage, because if you don't have the courage, you can't practice any other value consistently, right? Like, I really do fundamentally believe that. And number 2, loyalty. I mean, because, like, that's something that, like, once it breaks, right? Like, there's really no mending of that, and folks will always carry that with them wherever they go. And I'll be as loyal to that person as they are to me, if not more deeply. It's of the utmost importance to me, whether it's roommate, co-founder, my lovely wife, friends, among other folks. Like, if you have that in spades, like, I'll give it back to you in spades.
That's great.
Yeah.
Courage and loyalty. Yeah.
I think so. For me, my 2 co-founders, I would basically write them a letter that says, number 1, it is about the journey, not the destination. And I feel like to some extent my co-founders are the ones who've taught me that. I've always been focused on like, where is the end goal? Like, what is our end point? What are we getting to? What does the finish line look like? And I think to some point, like, you start learning the longer you go in this kind of entrepreneurial field that number 1, it's like kind of lonely, and number 2, you better celebrate the small wins and the small victories, because there are dark times. And I think in those dark times, you want people who you can like have a beer or several shots with. And I'm thankful that I found those people that I'm gonna sit in that room with, and we can look at each other and be like, oh, and have that be okay and be on the same page. Like, that's what I want. The co-founders, when things are going poorly, we're sitting in that room together being like, oh, and now how do we fix this? Like, what is the path forward? And I think on the flip side of that, like, I'm probably the most pessimistic person on my entire team. Like, I need people and I want co-founders who are gonna celebrate those wins and then slap me upside the head and say, yeah, we just did this and this was awesome. And like, you need to be thankful for that.
Right.
Because the next problem is around the corner, but right now, like, we're in this moment of victory and let's do it. And I want the co-founders who can sit at, this is the true story, we sat at Patchy's Pizza in downtown Palo Alto and had this really honest conversation when we got our first grant that was going to give us about $150,000 to do SIRUM for 3 people full time for an undetermined amount of time. And sit in this room and say to each other over this giant pizza, how long can we, each of us, go financially, and how long are we willing to go unpaid? And have a real honest conversation around what that's going to mean for, you know, people who want to buy a house or have a kid, and have those conversations. Like, you want your co-founders to be people that you can just be brutally honest with and have this like radical transparency with. And you want people who are going to sit in that room with you. You're all going to be drinking and it's going to be terrible, but you know somehow you're going to make it through because you have each other.
So do people drink shots at Instagram?
We do. We have a strong. Our original company's name was Bourbon, B-U-R-B-N, because it was cool to drop vowels back then. And like the advantage or disadvantage of naming your company Bourbon is that literally any time an investor or anybody's like, I wonder what I should send them as a gift, it would be like Bourbon.
That's awesome.
And it's the worst mistake we ever made was drinking it all, because like we like.
You can send some to us if you want.
We got all this amazing bourbon and rye as gifts, and like the rye market has actually gone insane in the States. So there's all this like Pappy Van Winkle that, like, I mean, it was best drank, don't get me wrong, but it's like I look at it now, I'm like, wow, that's like a really expensive bottle now. No, I think like what's made Kevin and I work, I mean, we're now 6 years in, which in some companies, I mean, not a long time. Other startups, like quite a long time, and like we still really like each other, and we would like, you know, if Instagram disappeared, we'd totally start a company with each other. And I think the key is that neither of us wants each other's jobs. I think that's like the fundamental thing that makes it work, is like, I know he's the CEO, he knows I'm the CTO, like he like doesn't really question anything on engineering and like how things get built and how like the engineering team is built, and like, you know, somebody ultimately needs to be the CEO. I think it's really messy when you end up with 2 co-founders that don't have like the knowledge of like, no, somebody actually needs to end up deciding and moving forward. And I've seen a lot of relationships go south where like they weren't able to do that, or when they just like end up in each other's business all the time. So 6 years in, it's really worked, and like, if you're doing it right, your jobs get bigger and bigger over time. And actually you're hiring other people because your job gets too big and you need to like get more people in there as well. But that's the tricky part. But our equivalent to whiskey was like Taqueria Cancun on Market Street. Whenever things got really dire, it's like the dirt. If you're ever going to San Francisco, like I actually don't recommend the Market Street one. It's like the dirtiest place in the world. You see rats. But like there's something that like, in terms of like deep company troubles that can only be solved out by having like a really greasy burrito and a like Mexican beer at like 10 p.m. on Market Street.
That's fun. If we killed this question, do you think, or you think we got enough? All right. One of the questions from the audience is, how do you know when to give up or pivot? And Reed, you had an experience in 2011, is that correct? When you were transitioning from a physical world to a digital world, when there were some decisions you made that you had to change?
Yeah, we were all DVD up until 2007, which is when we started streaming. YouTube had started streaming at the end of 2005, so it was sort of like early YouTube. It barely worked. Poor video quality, only on a PC. And over the next couple of years, it started growing and growing. And we realized, wow, by 2011, streaming was really taking off. And we had competitors like Hulu and others that were pure streaming, no DVD. And we didn't want to be the company that was the hybrid company.
Yeah.
That is, we were better at streaming because we also had DVD, because that would be a declining advantage over the succeeding years, not a growing advantage.
Yeah.
And so we had to wean ourselves from that strength. If we were going to eventually win in streaming, we had to win as a streaming company, we had better streaming. And so we came up with this idea of splitting the companies and you know, having the DVD company have a new name, Quickster, which, interestingly, before we announced it, actually tested really well. People liked the name. But after we announced it, they hated it. It was, you know, worst possible thing. And so we went through this really ugly time where basically we were breaking up with customers who wanted the hybrid experience of both earlier than they were ready to be broken up with. And we should have done a more graceful evolution. And today they're basically separate. There's DVD.com, a Netflix company, and there's streaming from Netflix. And we still have 5 million DVD members, and they love the DVDs, and it works great. But it was too early, and it was too in their face. And then, we had lots of internal justification and rationalization, and finally we just caved.
What was that like, though, personally? You're running a company, it's doing fabulously, you make a decision, you researched it. Yeah. Some of us make decisions without research, but you researched it. And, but it just flopped. And what was that like, waking up every night, or looking online, reading about it, stock price plummeting? Didn't the stock go down quite a bit at that time?
Yeah, stock went down. The hardest part was the guilt and shame that we felt. We had spent so many years building things up and steadily tending to the brand, and people really hated the move. Yeah. And hated us, and it was our fault. It's one thing if we lost to a competitor and they just ran faster than us. Yeah. I mean, that feels bad in a different way, but this is self-induced. And so it just felt awful, and the sense of shame, particularly for me, that I felt. But I think even everyone around of like, hey, I could have objected more than I did. I didn't think it was a good idea, but I didn't speak up enough. And so I think we all felt this collective, boy, did we screw this up. Yeah. But then it's been super satisfying building out of that. And coming back. And then you gain a sense of strength because you can go through such a traumatic time and then survive it.
But you moved pretty quickly, right? I mean, it was like 60 days later you went...
It was 4 months, I think.
4
So
months.
relatively quickly.
Relatively quick.
It took a while because at first you deny that, no, you'll get through it. They'll forget it, And the storm just kept getting bigger and bigger. So, we just learned you can go too fast. You can definitely wait too long on things, but you can definitely go too fast. And, it's a judgment. Back to my chess analogy, it's not as simple as move fast, okay? Sometimes it's not that. And it's really more nuanced about some things moving fast at this pace and others. And, but we made the mistake and then we got through it. And, now it's someday it'll be a good business school case.
I think it's notable that you use the language of a storm. My second company, ProFounder, was... To say it briefly, it was a Kickstarter for businesses, so crowdfunding for investment capital before it was legal, which was interesting. So what we did was we had this sort of do-it-yourself suite of tools and resources for entrepreneurs to create, what looked like the typical kind of profile page that you'd see on Kickstarter for their project, their startup, and to raise investment capital based on revenue share or equity. Anyway, we had to patch together a bunch of dusty old state exemptions, and we started this 3 years before, and I won't go into lots of boring legal stuff, but like 3 years before the Jobs Act was even a twinkle in legislators' eyes, so we were too early. But we charged through, we raised funding, we had this product, and it did help entrepreneurs, it helped a lot of them, we were very proud of that. But we saw that the world was changing, and I think that the question that you asked about what is it like when you have this moment where you're questioning whether you shut things down or you pivot? For us, we kept coming back to the assumptions that we had at the beginning about how we believed, what we thought was true in the world, what we wanted to test to see if it was true, and sort of how we would know, right? What we were going to do to figure that out. And we kept coming back to these things. And for 3 years, we felt like enough of those things were true, and we had been right enough. When the Jobs Act came around, we thought, okay, the world's going to change so drastically, number one, that we had the choice of either doubling down on the current product, which was not going to be as good as the crowdfunding exemption is now. And again, it was like patching together super old exemptions that worked or were a pain in the butt. So we simplified it as much as we could pre-Jobs Act. So anyway, we had to either double down on what we had, knowing that it would become irrelevant if and when the Jobs Act passed, or we had to, I guess there were 3 options. We had to go on life support and just like wait and see what happened in the world, but like lay everybody off. Or we could make something that was a huge gamble, betting on the world that we thought would exist, again, assumptions again, post-Jobs Act and post the SEC creating all these rules to interpret the Jobs Act. So basically, Oh, and by the way, I was 8.5 months pregnant with my twins. So I was like holding myself and like waddling around Silicon Valley, raising a Series A funding. And we sort of had this come to Jesus moment where my co-founder and I looked at each other and were like, are we ready to do this? Do we want to raise all this funding, and are any of those 3 choices good enough? And we felt like we weren't. So we felt like they weren't. So we actually shut the company down. We didn't pivot. It was the right time to quit things. And the storm language resonates for me because it took me a few years, I'd say 3 years later, to sort of figure out what I really thought and felt about that experience. I was, I'm sorry, I was at Harvard for like this executive education program. We were reading a case study on like one of the more famous Everest climbs. A bunch of climbers went up, there was a storm coming in. Half of them decided like, we're so close, we've invested so much in this, we're gonna go for it. And technically, like they got the goal, they summited. That was their goal. But they all died like nobody made it back alive. Half of them said, hey, the goal is not the summit. The goal is not to keep going at all costs. The goal is to see what's going on here and like stay alive. So they turned back despite the years of investment and training and money that went into getting so close. So we felt like, I think I look at my experience that way. We were at the right place in the right time, and we were early, but then, had we kept going, we were right in the middle of like the beginning of things changing in a great way for the crowdfunding world. But the storm was making things too uncertain, and so we turned back and we lived. And I guess I could go on and on about that analogy, but to be totally honest with you, I had a wonderful first few years as a mom, and I'm still having great years as a mom. That was an important value to me personally, and I really feel like we would have been, even if we could have had the money and there was money on the table, it would have been unwise and not an ethical decision, to be honest, to like take that money and pivot anyway and make this big gamble based on what we thought might happen, not just in months to come with the Jobs Act, but years later. And by the way, some of the rules were just set like in October, so it took years and years and years. So anyway, I appreciated your language around that because that's the analogy that makes sense to me, and it's how I kind of look at that experience.
Well, I think each of us at some point in our career will get into a point where you're in a very difficult spot where it's a public issue. There's a company down in Cupertino now which is in the middle of a huge issue on privacy versus security. And one company's values really values privacy, but there are a lot of people in the country who value security. And it's become a really big black and white issue where both groups have taken stands. What would you advise Tim Cook if you were talking to Tim on how to think about this issue? Because at this point in time, there are customers of theirs that have opinions that might be different than the company. At some point, can you take a stand that's almost too black and white? Or how do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I have a lot of respect for Tim Cook and Apple and what they're doing there. Definitely in their camp. I think the thing that will probably be the biggest test, I was looking at they've been polling people and it's like 38% of Americans think Apple. And it's like, I have a pretty technical degree, and even it took me like a while of reading to really understand the nuance of it. And so one of the I think my advice to Tim Cook, not that he needs my advice, but the thing that would be on my mind is trying to relate as much as possible, what metaphor is actually appropriate that doesn't hide the issue in some interesting way. And it's really hard because you can cherry pick it, right? Like one metaphor about it's like a ribbon and you're choosing whether to cut the ribbon. I'm like, it's really an iPhone pass. It's to some extent metaphors are incomplete, but they're also really necessary. So yeah, I think that's part of what I'm wrestling with. I'm also this is my year of nonfiction. I usually read fiction. I like fantasy dragon stuff. I'm like, no, this year I'm reading nonfiction. And I read an amazing book called The Righteous Mind that's all about where our morals come from and where morality comes from. And a lot of times we think it's like a very rational thing, but actually there's intuitions that then we post hoc rationalize. It's like an idea that I think resonated with me. But part of that was also understanding that it's really hard for us in this issue and other issues to have conversations that don't feel like speaking past each other, because we're just, it's our, instinct, it's our instinct fighting, but we're trying to talk with words. And so that's what I guess I'm trying to get at is can we start thinking about what are the values that are underlying the things that we're talking about? It's not about encryption, it's about, like you said, security, but what does security mean? It actually might mean two different things to two different people, just like freedom does, just like liberty does, right? And so it's a little scary to see the debate out in the open because it's not always quite at the nuance of the issues, but I think it's also really important that we have those conversations. My hope is like more of that, like digging in, and more of that education will hopefully lead to something good. I'm not super optimistic, but I'd like to be more optimistic about it.
Other thoughts?
I got the local current events question. I like it. Great job.
There's no question that Tim's sincere about the issue, and I think he properly is calling for the Congress and the political infrastructures to debate that one, and different people will fall on different parts of the spectrum, and we get to have a debate about that, which is good. For me, I'm sort of to one side, which is if my kids' kidnappers dropped their iPhone during the abduction, I know what I want to happen. And so I know for sure I want the FBI to be able to open that iPhone. Full stop. And I will trade a lot of privacy to have that security.
Right.
And so I'm on that side. I'm not saying everybody is. I'm not saying it's the only place to be.
Right.
Okay, I think it's a good debate. But personally, I would trade I would cede privacy to the FBI, and it has to be subject to the controls and subpoena that we've developed over the years to be protective. And they're not perfect controls, but by and large, I want that intervention.
Right. It's fascinating. Another question. What helps when you hit rock bottom? We know it helps KIAH. What helps when you hit rock bottom? Anything else? Have you ever hit rock bottom, Tristan?
Well,
have you ever been toward the rock?
I've never felt that way.
No.
And a lot of that really has come out of kind of my thinking over the past 5 years. And about 5 years ago, I got some advice from a gentleman, Tyler Perry, actor, producer, writer. And I was interviewing him in all these cities in like these one-on-one fireside chats. And just talking about his entrepreneurial journey. Now, Tyler Perry, you say what you want to say about his movies and all that other stuff, but he's one of the greatest entrepreneurs. I mean, the dude grew up, like, he was homeless, like, now he's one of the highest paid folks in Hollywood. So it was for American Express, we were speaking to other kind of small business owners. And I'll never forget this moment. We were in LA, and there's a woman, she was like sitting around in this vicinity. She raised her hand, she stood up, she said, Mr. Perry, I'm the small business owner, I have to always deal with these trials and tribulations. How do you get through those trials and tribulations, right? And what he said was probably one of the most profound things I ever heard, so much so that it gave me pause for about 25 seconds, and it was like super awkward. And he said he realized his potential as an entrepreneur when he understood that the trials you go through and the blessings you receive are the exact same things, right? And what he meant by that was those trials, at the end of the day, are just lessons, right? You really can't, and those lessons are blessings inevitably. And that was the one thing that really freed me up as an entrepreneur, because the one thing that you realize is once you go through these troughs, you start worrying about those troughs so much, right? It like just really occupies your mind all day. So when it comes to us, like we kind of breeze through it a little bit because I know that there's a lesson in that I need to appreciate, right? So I take that kind of rock bottom moment and really turn it ideally into kind of an ascent, right? So yeah, I really haven't had a true rock bottom moment. If anything, it happened before I got that advice. And that was times when I was like on Wall Street, didn't know what I was going to do, disillusioned among other things. But now, not really at all.
That's great.
Yeah.
Some might call that a growth mindset.
Yeah, touche.
Touche.
Silicon Valley.
Any others thoughts on that?
We joked earlier about like, you might ask a question and I'll do the politician thing and answer something else, but I just want to say this because I feel like it relates a little bit to the idea of success or failure and how you look at sort of what you've got day to day. I think one of the most helpful things for me over the last decade has been, again, really knowing what values I have and what matters to me and what currencies matter to me. So, we talk about unicorns. KIVA's a nonprofit unicorn. I don't know anything, but I actually wouldn't have it any other way. And I feel like I have been compensated abundantly in a lot of different other currencies. And I feel like in general in my work, I've gotten to be paid in ways that matter to me. I've gotten to work autonomously and independently on things that I care about deeply. I've gotten to work with people that I adore. I've gotten to have so many adventures and travel to more places than I ever dreamed I would get to go. and work with people in those different places and learn about what it means to be a human being on this planet because of those interactions. I've gotten paid very, very well. I feel very wealthy, even if financially speaking, you know, being a nonprofit founder, the currencies aren't always straightforward and obvious and clear. But to me, I feel like I've gotten paid quite well.
That's great. That's awesome.
I think I would add on one other thing is just like having perspective. I think that's what's really helped me when, you know, things are not going well. It's like, I mean, it's kind of like this. It's like, at the end of the day, everything I'm doing, I am so privileged to be able to like start, found, and run an organization. Like, I get to do something that I want to do rather than things that I have to do. I don't have to take a job to pay bills, to feed my family, and put a roof over their heads. You know, at the end of the day, like, no matter what happens with SIRUM, I just, like, you have to take that step back and say, I got my health, you know, and I can do what I want to do. Like, the idea of kind of self-actualization. I think that's one of the things that coming to a place like Stanford affords you that you don't realize when you first get here, is you're kind of in this world now where you get to literally create the world and try to shape the world that you want to live in. And it's like, this is such an incredible gift and such an incredible privilege that, you know, anything going wrong in the company, you just have to step back and say, yeah, but I get to do what I want to do and try to impact the world in really positive ways. And not everyone gets that opportunity. So I think at the end of the day, like, you know, besides having co-founders that you can drink with, is, you know, really, you know, recognizing that this is a privilege for all of us to be on this stage. It's a privilege to go to a place like Stanford, and it affords you all these opportunities. And like, you just gotta sit down and think, wow, like, yes, like, this is something that I now have, and appreciate that and get that perspective.
Can I add something to that? Because that's awesome. I mean, one of the funniest conversations I have are from like graduates of the business school or current students of the business school saying, oh my God, I don't know what to do, like what's going on? And I tell them one thing all the time. I say, your worst case scenario is better than 99% of the world's best case scenario. Right? Like, it's real. That was awesome. Yeah.
Well, Tristan, you know, we're scheduled to go till 9 o'clock, but I kind of feel like 2 hours is a really long panel for the audience as much. So why don't we go toward a wrap up? And I think that's a good lesson, but why don't we just imagine we're talking to a senior out in the audience, just to pick some age group. And if you had one thought to share that would be great advice for them, what would it be? And then we'll kind of close. So anyone want to go first?
I mean, outside of like the 99% thing, which I kind of articulate at least at this point once a month to folks, I really do believe it. Like, take that to heart. I mean, the one thing for me, and perhaps this is like a function of my own personal upbringing, like, it's easy to get complacent here and expect things to come to you. And the one thing I like to tell folks, like, you're not going to get what you don't ask for, right? And I kind of think about at least what got me to the stage over the past kind of like 5 or 6 years since I've graduated. And I kind of think about kind of where I am relative to a lot of my classmates who, for all intents and purposes, are incredibly successful. But I realized that the one difference between kind of what I was able to do and what they're able to do is that, like, I'm willing to ask why 6 times when they're only willing to do it 5, right? And that's because I'm willing to ask for those things, right? And again, like, Stanford, it's great, right? Like, it's an incredible institution, and there's so much brilliance here. Like, don't expect anything, right? Take it, right? And that's probably one thing I'd kind of impart on that senior.
Thank you, Tristan. Let's hear it for Tristan.
I think if you're a Stanford senior, it's okay to not know what you want to do. You know, I think like Stanford, again, it can feel like a rat race where you have to have your 10-year life plan. And, you know, some of the people who are, you know, the quote most successful, I would say, from our graduating class were folks who went really off the beaten trail. You know, I'm thinking like a friend of mine who wanted to be a rapper and was my year at Stanford, Jadena, who like had a really amazing song, Classic Man, if you haven't heard it before. You know, it's like people are like, what is he doing? Like wanting to be a rapper, being at Stanford. And it's like, yeah, now he's, you know, nominating for a Grammy. That's pretty cool.
I haven't heard, could you give us a little bit of the rap?
I'm not going to, because this is recorded. Backstage,
It is recorded.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Backstage, I'll do it. I think like the thing I've learned most is that time is your most precious asset. And like you should just do stuff that you enjoy, do stuff that you love, and don't waste your time on things that you just know aren't gonna make you happy or aren't gonna meet whatever life goals that you have. I think like that's just the biggest thing is you realize, you know, that you could, you know, that your time is all that you have, and whether it's figuring out what you want to do or figuring out what you don't want to do, which can be equally as important. Maybe you need to go to Wall Street because you need to realize that I really hate finance. You know, just spend your time investing in yourself. Being at Stanford is kind of like being an entrepreneur. You get out of it what you put in to a large extent. And I think like take that mindset, continue using that mindset to be an entrepreneur for your own life. And really just enjoy that time and invest it in yourself and figuring out who you want to be, what you want to do, and what you want the world to look like because you were in it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's hear it.
This is all very good advice. So this is all complimentary to that.
You'd
And-
rather share with a picture probably than
Exactly.
words?
You know, I can take a photo and express it to you.
But you get 144 characters. Go ahead.
I think, and this is maybe personal to me and maybe shared by other folks on stage, but I've found myself growing the most in situations where I surprised myself. Like I had zero infrastructure experience, and the first 2 years of Instagram, we were scaling from 0 to 30 million to 100 million users, and like every day I was like, Ben Horowitz has a phrase, WFIO, like we're blanked, it's over, and like that feeling was constant, and also this feeling of like, my other like very inspirational image to that point is the golden retriever in the chemistry lab, and it says, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like that has been the last like 5 years of my life, and that's like fine. And I think, so for me, if that seems to appeal to you, like to seek out those situations, and regardless of whether you do a startup or you jump into a really challenging nonprofit that's doing interesting things, like if that seems like appealing to you, like throwing yourself in those situations where you don't really feel like you know what you're doing, to me is where like the growth didn't come from like, 1 to 2x, it goes to like 10x or 100x, where like, wow, like I have a completely different set of experiences, values, like knowledge, connections, everything that I would have, and it just came from being in a really like out of my zone situation, and you'll learn a ton about yourself in that one.
Let's hear it from Mike.
So I know we're at a celebrating founders event, so this could be sacrilege, but I would say don't get hung up or obsessed with the idea of being a founder or being an entrepreneur. I think it's more important to work and live entrepreneurially. My favorite definition of entrepreneurship is Howard Stevenson's. He says that entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. It sounds kind of stodgy and academic, but if you break it down, for me, it's about the pursuit, not the possessions. It's about moving towards the thing, this opportunity in the world, this way that you think things can be different, a vision for a great product that you have, a vision for something better in the future, and doing that in a sort of, dogged way, day after day, pursuing that thing that you love, that you see out there, without regard to whatever comes up. The definition says without regard to resources currently controlled, but without regard to whatever it is that you or the world can tell you you don't have at any given time that you should need, or to move forward. Because at any moment in time, there will be a long list that you can make or that anybody else could make about what you lack. You might, at any moment, you're too young, too old, not enough experience, not enough education, not the right education. You picked the wrong major. You can't really do that. I think if you exercise and invest in that faith muscle, that imagination muscle, so that you can have a strong vision, so to pull you forward towards those things you want to create in the world, whether you're starting a company officially or just, joining a great team of people to do, that's already begun. Whatever it is, get good at living entrepreneurially, at seeing things of the future that you want to create, that you want to move towards, and doing that regardless of the things that might come up and feel like they should hold you back, because they don't need to do that.
cut classes on March 4th and watch House of Cards season 2. You will learn more about the dark side of power from Francis and Claire, which are necessary entrepreneurial skills.
That is great. Thank you. Well, let me just thank the panel. Thank you for coming. And let's also take a moment and thank, Leland and Jane, who, after a very difficult time where they lost their only child, their response was to found a university that would impact the world. We've had demonstration of that tonight. We see it all around us, and we see the future here in this room and on the campus. So let's just remember Leland and Jane and their generosity as we leave.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.